We are celebrating the works of Eric Fehrenbacher, Christina Kent, and Ananth Nayak. And I'm really excited to present their work at Cumaica Coffee in the Excelsior District, which will be up until May 4th, 2022. So we are gathered to celebrate Eric, Christina, and Anand's art, which is at Cumaica Coffee. The address is here. It's in the Excelsior District. We would love to have you all see the artwork in person and enjoy the cute little neighborhood cafe that Cumaica is. It's really colorful and has wonderful coffee, tea, and snack options. Okay, and I would like to welcome our first artist, Eric Fehrenbacher. Hi,
Hi.
Eric, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for inviting me. This is wonderful.
Great, good to hear. So Eric incorporates found objects and acrylic paint to create 3D paintings depicting movement and pattern found in nature. So Eric, my first question for you is, what was your discovery process with using copious amounts of paint layers to craft a sculpted composition?
Thanks. Great question. I think the journey was along the lines of I really thought collage was interesting, bringing in pieces of different parts of life and bringing them all together in a new way. And then somewhere along the lines, I discovered that found objects can also be part of an artwork, and that really kind of took collage to the next level. I often look for found objects that are part of daily life or part of nature, or have some other meaningful association. And when I bring them together, I try to find the pattern or beauty in the chaos. I like to start with something very organic and messy, and kind of push and pull it until I can find something beautiful coming out of it. Layers of paint is just kind of my latest exploration of how can I create a surface that is complex and textured and shape it in a way that brings out the meaning that is in the mess.
Excellent. That was so succinct. I love it. Thank you. Yes, it's great to see the layers here that you've kind of excavated out.
Yeah.
And it really is not that hard to notice how nature and community influence your work. Can you elaborate on your use of movement and pattern?
Yeah. Nature and community, they're both similar in that they're like organic living systems that have lots of individual parts existing together, that depend on each other, maybe getting along, maybe not getting along, but it's all complex and tangled and intertwined. I think the movement and pattern comes from having all these elements together, but then kind of taking a step back to see what are the bigger brush strokes, what's the story arc, what's the trend, and how do the small actions of many individuals tell a bigger story when they're all together. How do they have a bigger impact, bigger view of things?
Beautiful. A quick question. What are the small raised dots in this piece?
They were some kind of seeds. I think it was either mustard seeds or I don't know. I've got a whole box that I call, the label says like art food. It's like different things I found at the produce store that I want to sprinkle into the paint.
Oh, that's great. Are there any other unconventional materials that you like to work with?
Mostly stuff from nature, stuff from food. A few years back, I set out to make a piece that was a grid of tire tread squares. It seemed like it was going to be simple and straightforward, but it turned out that steel belted tires are pretty much made to be indestructible. The tools that cut steel will like burn and smoke when trying to cut through rubber. So that was really challenging. But I eventually kind of like gave up on the steel belted tires, and I found some non-steel belted tractor tires that are like lawnmower tires that kind of had the same look, but was easy to cut through. yeah, I was thinking about like, what are some of the other things that I've used over the years? Computer casings, soda can tops, Christmas ornament balls, computer motherboards, burnt boards, anything that can play with fire. That's always fun.
This one is just found objects. I assume there's some seeds and some sticks as well.
There are. I found some roots and vines that I wanted to figure out how to incorporate into a piece, and then this one was actually like, it was like basically a whole tumbleweed that that I wanted to embed it into the paint, and then kind of like excavate the surface a little bit to bring out kind of like the layers. The challenge with this piece was that the tumbleweed was three-dimensional. It's like, you know, like a ball, and when you try to squish it into paint, you only get a little bit of it. So I had to build kind of a frame out of wire and wood that would kind of like hold it down and flatten it in place for it to be in the wet paint for it to dry. So I kind of think the problem solving of how to squish the tumbleweed into the surface of the painting was as big of a part of the creative process as the actual, you know, working on it. But it also does have some of the seeds, and some of the seeds got left by themselves, and I like to sand down the surface and get it, how the raised items look different when they're sanded down to the paint.
Yeah, definitely. That's super apparent here. And you're almost like an engineer in a way with how you have to build things to create what you want to create, and playing with fire and whatnot. And it's really interesting. Are there any other projects that you have worked on that you had to create like an apparatus to get to your composition?
I mean, it kind of seems like all of them. Yeah, I think when I've worked with computer boards, you know, like it always involves buying some sort of new tool that I don't have, as a bandsaw, or in the case of the piece that we're looking at here, a sander, you know, a different sander. And recently bought a new router so that I could, you know, make the frames really nice. So seems like my process tends to be, when I'm working on this piece, I'll get ideas for the next piece and get inspired. How can I push it a little further? And that always seems really simple in my mind. And then when I actually try to make it happen, it's more involved than I expected.
All right. So do we have any questions in the chat for Eric?
Not yet. People are being a little shy.
Thank you, Eric, for your beautiful artist talk, how you have to create to actually create and all the different weird found things you like to use. It's fascinating, and I can't wait to see what else you come up with.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, thank you. Okay, and our next artist is Christina Kent. Hi, Christina.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. Super excited to be here.
Awesome. Christina is an oil painter that explores the California landscape, still lifes, and portraits with well-balanced color relationships. First question for you is, can you speak about your artistic influences, especially regarding your use of soft, dappled pockets of light?
Yeah, so one of my big artistic influences is the 19th century painter John Singer Sargent. And I think a little later in the slideshow, one of the paintings that I have that's up in the show is a study of one of his works. It's Group with Parasols, a study of his painting Group with Parasols. And the thing that I really like about his work, and also about some other contemporary painters, is that with respect to light, I think it's really interesting to see how light behaves and how light travels across forms, either in a portrait or also in the landscape, and how it can kind of create new shapes from the forms that we're seeing. So because of the way the light is hitting certain objects, it almost creates different shapes that then in the whole composition, it kind of makes the composition straddle both representation and abstraction. So if you think about the way like dappled light falls on a forest floor, the floor is just flat, soft dirt. But then if you have the dappled light streaming in through the trees, it actually creates these new shapes that don't actually exist. And so I think it's really cool that light can give rise to these different forms and can really make you see the landscape in a different way.
That was awesome. Thank you. I believe this is the painting you were regarding to. And yeah, do you want to elaborate more on this piece as well?
Yeah, so John Singer Sargent, I think, is just a fabulous painter in so many ways, and he's inspired a lot of my work. But this painting in particular really drew me, and I think the reason for it is because it's kind of like I said, it's almost straddling abstraction and representation. So when I first saw his version of the painting, I was really struck by the fact that in this painting there are several figures actually, and they're kind of laying in like a grassy green area. But the figures themselves, it's not immediately apparent how the figures are oriented. You kind of have to take some time to figure out, okay, there's like two women lying in the background, and then, oh, there's two men in the foreground, and oh, that's the guy's legs. And I think the reason why the figures don't immediately pop out as very clear is because the light is kind of highlighting parts of the figures that maybe you wouldn't usually highlight. Like the light's really hitting one of the guy's knees rather than illuminating the faces of the figures as you might expect in a traditional portrait painting. And so I really like that. It kind of gives the mind some time, some kind of detective work to do to figure out, okay, what's really going on here, and what am I seeing? It's one of his later works.
Yes, I know that he's known for the lady that has the strap off the shoulder.
Oh, yes.
Created lots of controversy.
Huge scandal.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I definitely know Sargent, and I'm glad you brought some art history into the mix. Very, very
sure.
appreciated. Yeah. So my next question, what sources do you like to work from? Do you paint in plein air, photographs, or from memories and dreams?
Yeah, so I guess in like my whole artistic journey, I started out painting from my imagination when I was a kid, and then I switched to photographs in high school and in early college, and I was mostly just painting portraits and photographs. And it wasn't until more recently that I started doing daily paintings and doing more still life works and plein air that I actually started painting from life and also painting on site. And for landscapes, I find it to be just extremely, I think one of the hard parts for me with painting is to not get too caught up in the details of a painting and to focus on what is the essential, what are the most important parts that I'm trying to communicate, and how do I communicate a clear message to the viewer. And so one of the things I like about plein air painting and painting outside on site is that because I usually only have a limited time window, maybe I have an hour or two before the sun shifts, and then the painting, the whole composition is different. So I'm really focused on catching this moment, and that forces me to paint with an efficiency and also with an energy that I don't find as much in the studio. That being said, I found oil painting on site is pretty difficult. Usually what I do is I'll do smaller sketches when I go on site, and then I'll bring them back into the studio for my larger oil paintings. So then I can kind of get the impression when I'm on site, and then build that into a larger painting once I get into the studio.
I'm glad a classic technique like that is still being upheld by you today. I know that that's how many artists used to work, and it's very smart. That's how you have to really play with the light, and like you said, capture that distinct moment, and then you get to build upon it, and what you felt in the moment is still within that painting, even after you expand upon it. So yeah, it's quite lovely. I do enjoy this piece. I like the coolness of the clouds. Steam, maybe?
Yeah, it's a hot springs.
Okay, great. Yeah, I love that cool gray with that warm background sky and that like golden like grass. It's just quite beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
And my last question for you is, what fuels your motivation to paint landscapes?
So I think part of it is I moved to California about 7 years ago, and I just fell in love with the landscape here. I'm from Texas, which is a great place to be, but it's very flat. There's not much of a landscape to speak of other than the trees that are right in front of you. So coming to California and being able to see these like rolling hills, even like in the city, you have rolling hills, and then you go out like around South Bay is where I used to live. And we just have these great nature preserves, and where you can really get a sense of the vastness of the landscape. You can get onto a high vantage point, and then you can just see for what feels like miles and miles. So and that paired with the weather always being really nice in California, it makes plein air painting here just a joy. So I just find it like very beautiful and peaceful to be able to go out into nature, sit for a while, just me and my painting and the landscape, and learn to appreciate it in this kind of slower way. The other thing I really like about the landscape and the landscape around here is that, as I said, because I can get onto a high vantage point, I can really get a sense of the vastness of the landscape, and I can see as far out until where the landscape basically meets with the sky. And as some of the earlier paintings you showed, there's kind of this merging of the landscape with the sky as if they're actually not separated. And I like the idea that the land is so vast and so big, and I can be a part of that through painting.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So insightful. And welcome to California.
Thank you.
I want to see if there's any questions in the chat for Christina.
No, not yet, Christina. Thank you so much.
Christina, thank you so much for speaking about your practice with us.
Thanks, Nick.
Okay, and our next and final artist is Anand Snyak. Hi, Anand, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Nick. Looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have.
Excellent, me too. Anand's impressive drawing skills and supple watercolors range from surrealism to urbanscapes and elaborate geometric compositions. So, Anand, can you elaborate on your start to finish process when you are drawing one of your intricate pieces?
Sure. It usually begins with a lot of visualization. You know, I think one of the things that I do maybe differently from what other artists do, I spend an enormous amount of time visualizing, what I'm going to put on paper. At any point in time, I usually have 2 or 3 themes that I'm considering. You know, I'm constantly observing objects, around me. I'm looking for quotes by public figures. These are the things that actually inspire me to express my art. And so I begin with that visualization process. That process takes anything from 2 days to a week, 10 days. You know, because I don't sketch anything on paper until I've completed my visualization process. So that's an extensive process. I take a lot of trouble identifying the right objects and elements that will go into a drawing. And only when I'm maybe 85% sure of, what I'm going to actually draw, do I start sketching on paper. And then I move into the what I call the final phase, which is basically inking the drawing. Which again, if I'm actually going to make any mistakes in my pen and ink, it's in the first couple of hours of when I start my inking. So I'm extremely careful for those first few hours. And once I cross that, that initial threshold, then it becomes easy. For some reason, it just kind of flows. I divide my drawing into sections because at the end of the day, it's monochrome. Okay, so it becomes extremely important to section your drawings to bring out the important elements to the foreground, push elements into the background, because you don't have that concept of soft edges and hard edges, since you're not doing any painting. So everything that you do is dependent upon the weight of the line and any patterns or textures that you want to put into the drawing. Funnily, and fortunately, in the last about a year and a half that I've been doing pen and inks, I haven't lost a single drawing owing to any error that I made when I actually inked it out.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's something that I'm really proud of. The levels of concentration that you need to put into it is a lot, and and sometimes you wonder, as Christina mentioned earlier, you spend 20-30 hours doing these drawings, and it's a lot of effort.
I know what you're talking about.
But I enjoy every minute of it. It's a very creative process, because unlike watercolors or any other paint medium, you have the complete freedom to use any object, any pattern, any texture into your drawing in order to express what it is that your thoughts and ideas and experience that you're bringing to that drawing.
Mm-hmm. So this is a great piece for my second question for you.
Sure.
Which is, where have you encountered complex ideas like existentialism? And why did you decide to explore the idea in your work? Now, I asked this question because that's what I get from this piece, and Circle of Life as well, which was the previous.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you see, going back to my childhood, I was, and I continue to be, really fascinated by science. Okay, science, the concept of space exploration, mechanical objects. I used to, as a kid, take clocks apart, try and put them back together again, try and make something else out of all the cogs and wheels that you have inside a watch or a clock. I'm fascinated by scientific theory. So I do a lot of reading on these subjects. Again, I'm very interested in mythology. So if you look at this drawing, it's basically expressing a school of thought that exists, that everything that we have. I mean, a lot of the statues and the pyramids and a lot of these what do you call them, monuments, in the world today, couldn't have been constructed given the kind of tools that people had at that point in time, right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of conjecture as to, did some aliens, some alien civilization come here to to do this kind of stuff. So this drawing basically expresses that, everything that we have here, if you look at it, you've got all these building blocks, you've got the Sphinx, you've got the Maui head, you've got the Buddha statue, you've got the Peruvian head there. It's all coming from a black hole out in space. Okay, and it's curving its way towards Earth. So that's the concept behind this drawing, and it basically says that we are not alone. There is somebody else out there who's been here before we have.
Maybe like parallel universes.
That's
in a
right.
way.
That's right. And you'll find this theme runs through a lot of my drawings. Mm-hmm. There are human figures. There's a lot of geometry. There's a lot of surreal kind of objects, concepts that find their way into my pen and ink drawings. Okay, I do a lot of watercolor. When I was 10 years old, I did a lot of oil on canvas. Okay, I used to do oil on canvas at that time, and then for about 40 years, I did no art at all. Okay, I was involved in, I got interested in sports. I played, squash at an international level. So painting and that kind of stuff went out the window at that point in time. Then, I was an entrepreneur for a number of years. And now when I came back to painting, I decided that, oil on canvas was probably not something that I wanted to get back into. And I started watercolors. Now, watercolors and pen and ink, two completely different mediums. Okay, one deals with a lot of tight detail, pen and inks, and watercolor again is a medium that is very loose. At the same time, if you look at this bottle, it's a very tight representation of reflection of a bottle. And the background again is a very loose, wet on wet approach. So it actually, I find this kind of, mix of watercolors and pen and ink challenging, at the same time very satisfying, because it allows me to use a lot of the techniques, across mediums. There's a lot of learning that I can take from one medium to the other. For example, in pen and inks now, I'm actually now exploring, and I have already done pen and ink with alcohol inks and pen and ink with watercolor. So it's very complementary.
So I chose this piece that you submitted just to show like your range and show like a different side of like your pen and ink heavy portfolio.
This one really, again, like I said, most of my inspiration for my drawings comes from maybe excerpts from poems, from quotations by public figures, from various, for books, whatever. This one is actually from a line from a poem. I think it was by Robert Frost, which says that, "Look into my eyes and I will show you my soul." Okay, so that's the line that actually caught my fancy, and I was trying for days to try and figure out what can I do to represent that. And this is what I came up with. That basically, if you have a kind of surreal human head, the eyes are very hypnotic, and you've got this swirl, which which is merged with her neck, and you've got those roots of those are the roots of a banyan tree, which are which create that surreal kind of atmosphere. And then again, it's all about contrast, it's all about textures, it's all about different patterns that you use to pull the whole thing together.
Yeah, the banyan roots resemble Eric's vascular osmosis piece, which had the tumbleweed. So it's kind of funny, like a little similarity there.
That's right. That's
pattern.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at this, just to expand a little bit on the techniques involved here, you'll notice that it's very easy if you don't do your textures and your contrasts right, then this drawing kind of loses its dimensionality. Because there's a lot of intricate roots out there which will get lost in the background if you're unable to bring them to the foreground.
Definitely, yes.
So that's where I feel that these drawings really shine in terms of the detail and also the simplicity. It's actually just 2 or 3 elements that you've actually put together.
Great. Do we have any questions for Ananth?
Yes, we do, actually. All right. Somebody asked, have you studied kinesiology or other body movement modalities?
Honestly, no. I haven't had any formal education in art. Okay, I'm completely self-taught. I haven't attended any art school or any formal training in art. So I'm in the process of actually learning things and developing my skills as I've been going along over the last 4 or 5 years. And the one thing that I'm working on right now is Islamic geometry, which I feel will really, I can actually dovetail that kind of geometry into my pen and ink. So yeah, to answer that question, yeah. So the short answer to that question is no.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, did you say you were self-taught just within the past 4 to 5 years?
As I said earlier, I painted a lot when I was 10, 11, 12 years old. And then I picked up art again in 2017 or 18. And whatever I've done, well, my body of work really covers the last 4 or 5 years.
Great, thank you. Awesome. Okay, and thank you again, Ananth, for your
Thank you.
beautiful insight to your work and your practice and your history. And yeah, it's really fantastic. And
Thank you so
I
much
can't
for
wait to
having me here.
Yeah, of course. I want to give a big thank you to all of our artists once again, to Eric, Christina, and Ananth. I really enjoyed hearing about your process, and I would love to give you all a round of applause. Yay!
To everyone, yeah.
We're really happy that you participated in our Art in Neighborhoods exhibition at Cumaica, which is on view at 4726 Mission Street until May 4th. So check the hours here. Make sure to get a nice coffee and snack while you're there and looking at the arts. I'd like to conclude this visual presentation.
And I do have some questions for the other artists as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're going to open up the floor right now. I just want to say hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. And you can shoot those questions away, Vanessa.
Okay. Let's go back to Eric.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, Eric. Someone in the chat messaged in asking, do you feel like you have too many found things to utilize or just enough?
I'm sure it's on the too many found things side of things. Like a lot of times I'll get inspired about what if I had a lot of this, or what if I had a lot of that? And then maybe I'll spend a year or two collecting a 5-gallon bucket full of wires, or crushed cans that you find on the side of the road, and they're all kind of weathered and crinkled. I at one point I was like going to garage sales looking for keyboards so I could pull off all the keyboard keys, but sometimes sometimes by the time I've collected enough of the thing to make the vision that was in my head, I've kind of moved on from that theme, and then like, oh, I'm not so interested in keyboard keys anymore, and now I have a bucket full of them. So a few years ago, we did a pretty large house move when I moved to California in 2018, and I had like some of these buckets of stuff that I collect. I'm like, oh, I'm not really feeling the wires thing anymore, and so that was a pretty good trigger for like kind of purging and moving on from some of the stuff that I've collected. But definitely collecting is part of the fun too, I think.
Is there anything in your current collection of materials that you've been like holding on for a long time that you haven't quite found the perfect expression for it yet?
I have lots of boxes of sticks where I find the perfect sticks, and then I find more perfect sticks, and plan to be put to use in some of the next couple artworks that I have started. So
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Christina, I have a question for you. Has your art expression changed since moving to California, as in technique, perception, etc.?
Yeah, so my my art's changed in two major ways since coming to California. Prior to moving here, when I was in high school and in undergrad, I did a lot of photorealistic painting, and so I was focused on making very detailed paintings that would take me 40 hours or more sometimes. And my painting became just really, really tight and really tedious. And it got to the point where by the time I moved to California, I was actually hardly painting anymore because each painting was just such a monumental effort. And then it was on a whim actually during the pandemic that I just kind of saw this painting workshop that was on daily painting. And the idea behind daily painting is that instead of doing paintings that take 40 hours or more, you do one painting every day that takes maybe just 1 or 2 hours. And so that whole idea that, oh, each painting doesn't have to be this masterpiece that's full of detail, but actually I can learn a lot and I can experiment a lot by doing small daily paintings and making painting just this daily practice that I do rather than this whole big thing. That really transformed my painting. Another big change that happened too, as I mentioned in response to Nick's question, was that I started doing a lot more painting from life. So that includes plein air painting, going outside, going to the open space preserves here in California or out to the beach and painting there. But it also includes setting up still lifes in my home and doing that with just bowls of oranges or flowers or things like that. And the thing that was really revolutionary for me in painting from life was that I realized that it actually shifted the way that I perceive the world. So when I started doing still life painting or landscape painting, I would really be on the lookout for what's a beautiful composition and what's magical about the way the light is hitting these oranges or the way the light is going across the landscape. And I ended up taking that perception into my view of the world in general. So I found that this training of painting from life caused me to be on the lookout for paintings kind of all around me. And that's been really, that's been a huge breakthrough for me, because I realized that there is really just inspiration everywhere. Everywhere we look, we can find something beautiful and something important, even in the mundane things.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christina. Those are all the questions I caught in the chat so far.
I do have a question for Christina, actually. When you are doing your daily painting, how much paint do you put out? Do you reuse yesterday's paint at all, or are you very good about using just what you need?
Yeah, I also, especially like I've been on a student budget for a while, and oil paint is not cheap. So I try to save, I try to economize with every bit of paint, but at the same time, when the daily painting class that I took and other just books that I was reading about daily painting when I was first getting into it, everyone is emphasizing it's like put a lot of paint out and use a lot of paint and really load up the brush to get these really, because I think when you're doing quick, small paintings, each brush stroke becomes really important. And so you don't want weak brush strokes. You don't want really light paint, because it's just going to take away the impact of that brush stroke. So I do try to really load up the paint, and oftentimes what I'll do is I actually mix my paint in advance. So if I set up a still life, then I'll do like a small drawing of the still life to map out where everything's going to go. And then I just spend a lot of time just looking at the still life, figuring out what colors, what are some of the main color groups that are in that still life. And then I mix them with my palette knife. So then when I get to painting, I can just start kind of filling in the shapes and then adjusting a bit as I go. And so that does mean that sometimes the nice part is that it's easy to load up the paint on the brush. I can always get a nice big amount of paint, but then I oftentimes have paint left over. And so what I usually do, I'll try to save my paint. So the cool thing about oil paint is that you can throw it in the freezer and it doesn't dry. Yeah.
Oh. Wait,
so,
what?
Yeah. So I have my palette in this like little, like basically plastic Tupperware thing. And I can just put it in the freezer, and then it actually, I mean, the paint will eventually dry over time because you're taking it in and out, but it can last like for weeks without drying. So
I also have that container.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Oh my God. Wow. You're a lifesaver. Thank you.
Yeah. And another thing is clove oil also. If you like put some clove oil, like the essential oil, if you put that on like a paper towel and put that under your palette, for whatever reason, that also help, like just a few drops, it'll help keep your paints dry or your paints wet. So yeah, so I do that. And then sometimes like if I'm really like crunched for time, I'll set up a still, if I just did a still life the previous day that used certain colors, and I'll set up a similar still life. So like, oh, I still have these colors left. And I only have maybe I have like 30 minutes to do a quick painting. So I'm just gonna use the colors that I was using yesterday, save a bit on time. But yeah.
I have just another question for Eric, a quick question. Where did you move from?
I was in the Chicago area.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in southern Indiana, moved to Chicago as a young adult and stayed there for a number of years, but always wanted to be in California, specifically Bay Area. It's just, I had visited here. It's beautiful here. Awesome. And I'd always been kind of jealous that it seemed like there was nature and city with an artistic culture, you know, baked into the city. Like it just seemed like the best of both.
Well, I'm happy to have all you artists here in the Bay Area with us, creating such wonderful artwork. And I really want to give a toast to you all for your arts reception and having artwork in Cumaica with us. So cheers to you. Thank you so much for participating and being an incredible artist. Cheers. Woo!